little late. We had the 2007 Community Citizen Planning Committee. From that was a subcommittee, and they decided to do a book. I don't know when this happened because I came in after that, but they wanted to put a book together about to celebrate the anniversary of Jamestown. So they put out a call for stories, and they expected to get a handful, 10 or 15. They got 41 stories, and this was a concern because we didn't want it to be a huge book. The people on the committee are all county historians, and these people just blow you away with their knowledge of the county. I've lived here for 22 years, and I learned so much by editing this book. It was amazing. And just to be in the same room with these historians, and they're throwing names and stories and facts around, it's awesome. So they got 41 stories, then they had to whittle that down to a more manageable number. And I think they discarded some stories because they were, well, everybody knows that story. And I was saying under my breath, the historians know the story, but the rest of us don't. What we came out with, though, when I read the book, it was a little confusing as to where things are, even though I've lived here for a long time. So I asked my husband to make a map, and he did a beautiful job on it. But you can see, even from a distance, the black dots are where the stories happen. And I thought it was really neat that we covered the whole county. That was purely by accident. And of course, Jack Harry gets the entire parkway, which I think is pretty neat. So that was a fluke. And the other fluky thing is we covered the entire 400 years. There was more heavy coverage in the 20th century than in the beginning, but that happened by accident. But this was all by accident because all these stories came in, it wasn't planned. People just wrote their stories and sent them in. So that was pretty interesting coming together. And another neat thing about the story is there's something in here for everybody. I mean, I'm not too interested in war, but I'm more interested in personal stories. So we got the war stories, and we have the personal stories. It's not only politics in this county. It's not only ancient history. We also have Civil War history, of course, and the personal interest stories are covered in here. And we have actual letters of some of our early residents just talking about their day-to-day life, which, in our day-to-day life, I went to Giant today, I cooked dinner, I watched this on TV. It doesn't seem very interesting, but 200 years from now, it can be much more interesting. There's a lot of stories about women, and this happened by accident. It wasn't planned. We have Ivacota Farm, which was founded by a woman, the suffragists, of course, the Occoquan workhouse. And the stories documenting the feminine wiles, I think, are some of my favorites. That would be Antonia Ford, who was maybe a spy in Fairfax, and the way they saved Mount Vernon. I'm not going to tell you these, you have to go read them. But just the way these two women got certain things done I thought was very entertaining. And these stories were not put in here just because they were about women. They're very interesting stories about history. And of course, we have stories about men building great or important or lasting things, like the areas of Lincolnia and Franconia, Herndon, Mount Zephyr, which I didn't know anything about, the railroads, post offices, poorhouse. We have stories of the well-known, like Jack Harry and the Fitzhughs and Washington. Fitzhugh and Washington built large houses that we protected or saved, and Jack Harry who pushed or dragged or shoved Fairfax County to new horizons. And we also have stories of everyday people: Jeremiah Moore, Jim Robinson, Elhanan Wakefield, Antonia Ford, this Navy spy, Robert Gunnell, John Bell, Sid Holland, Martha Panino. And there are stories about whole families: John Bell's family, the Oliver family, the Wilkinsons. The Wilkinsons, that's an interesting story. That's more of the day-to-day life of the Wilkinson family, but the descriptions are fascinating. And there's lots of specific events, like the duel between John Randolph and Henry Clay. John Randolph showed up for the duel in the afternoon in his white bathrobe. He didn't explain why, but he was wearing it. And of course, we also have the darker side of the history. The slavery, of course, can't leave that out. Treatment of the women at the workhouse, which is really heartbreaking. The neglect, almost to the point of loss, of Washington's Mount Vernon. How we lost two of Fitzhugh's houses, the Civil War, the residents of the poorhouse and Ivancoda Farm. The Cold War, the Nike missiles, the grisly murder at Keene's Mill. That's quite a story. That was cleaned up quite a bit from the ghost story, but the ghost story's for kids, so you don't want to put it in grisly details. And the March on Selma, that's another fascinating story. That's a first-person account. It just carries you along, and she really made you feel like you were there. You could tell what it felt like to be her there. So, but it's safe to say that this book is really about people, of course. What is Fairfax County? It's the people. If it weren't the people, it would still just be forest. The people who made major changes to the society and the area, like Washington, Fitzhugh, Canino, Harity, the groups of people who had an impact, the Filipino Americans, the black slaves, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, who saved Mount Vernon. And that's the first historic preservation property ever, and it's still privately owned by them. The suffragists, the Fairfax Education Association, the freedom marchers who went from here to Selma. The individuals who did interesting things, and the people whose names we have forgotten or whose names don't matter really. They just lived their lives and sometimes recorded their lives in letters and diaries. People who kept civilization growing, grew food, went to work, partied, raised good citizens, built railroads and buildings, voted their conscience, obeyed the law and sometimes didn't. Did good things most of the time and sometimes did bad things. They were good or bad people, same like today. After all, what would Fairfax County be now if it weren't for all those people? Sure, there'd be far less traffic, but how boring would that be? Would have nothing to talk about. In the end, we really went down to the wire on this book. Irma Clifton, who was chair of the Legacy Book Committee subcommittee, and was also until recently my boss as the editor of the Chronicle newspapers. Paula Elsie, who was our publishing expert, and she is the one who made this book look as good as it does in terms of, it could have just looked like a big fat pamphlet, but Paula really knows her stuff. So the three of us women went over to the printer over at Fullerton Industrial Park on the morning of Celebrate Fairfax. This was last year. And we packed several boxes of the book into my car, and the glue was still warm. I mean, it was literally still warm. That's how fresh these books were. And then we raced to the government center so they would be available for the fair. We carried a box upstairs to the 5th floor to present a box of them to Jerry Connolly. Finally, here's our baby, all the sweat and tears and hours and wrangling of this book. Well, of course, he wasn't there. He was outside at the fair. But we left the book there, the box of books. And I spent hours and hours and hours on this book. I proofread it 3 times, and soon after it was done, I went to lunch at a restaurant, and someone came up to me and pointed out a typo on a caption that I had written. After proofreading the book 3 times, it sort of broke my heart that there was a typo in it, but it's been corrected in the reprint. But what I did, I realized, does not compare with what the authors did. I mean, if you look at the listing of the how these people did their research, the amount of hours they spent putting this together and researching the book, documenting it, and just the writing of the stories is really amazing, the creativity.